I now have the pleasure of introducing our next panel discussion, type discussion. We're going to have some quick presentations from each of our panelists and then have a brief Q&A after their presentations. So this is the session on the strategies for sustainability across 5 different disciplines. First, we have Dr. Christy Lang Hearlson, Associate Professor in Religious and Theological Education at the College of Arts and Sciences here at Villanova. We have Dr. Raúl Diego Rivera Hernandez, the Associate Professor of Spanish in the College of Arts and Sciences at Villanova. Dr. Tom Umile. I'm doing my best here, folks. Umile. Associate Teaching Professor of Chemistry in the College of Arts and Sciences at Villanova, and Dr. Aaron Wemhoff, Professor of Mechanical Engineering in the College of Engineering at Villanova University. And then our moderator and presenter is Dr. Joseph Lennon, Associate Dean of International and Interdisciplinary Initiatives, Professor of English in the College of Arts and Sciences, and also our co-director of the Strategic Initiative for Climate Justice and Sustainability at Villanova University. And first up, I believe we have Joseph to say a few words.
Hi, thanks, Victoria. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here on this beautiful sunny day. Our multidisciplinary panel will focus on various methods of teaching. Faculty from 5 different disciplines are up here to present on how they teach sustainability from distinct disciplinary perspectives. Each professor has been involved in a Villanova sustainability workshop, and we aim to deepen our understandings of climate change, environmental justice, and other facets of sustainability education by talking about our methods, our challenges, and our successes. So Christy's coming up first, and she has a water jug.
Thanks, Joseph. It's good to see you all here today. I teach in the Theology and Religious Studies department, and I care a great deal about sustainability and environmental issues. I know a lot of other people who do as well, and yet I think one of the challenges we sometimes face is the sense that even though we might want to teach on environmental issues or incorporate sustainability into our courses, we're also still responsible for teaching the discipline we teach. And so sometimes it can feel as though these are in competition with one another. So I want to tell you about a course that I developed that I think has been really mutually enriching for discussions about sustainability and for learning about theology and religious studies. Are you controlling the slides for us, or I can do it? Great. Okay. I heard there's a slight delay. There it is. Okay. So the course is THL 1000. This is our introductory course. We all teach it, but we have a lot of latitude in how we teach it. I won't read the whole slide, but I want to emphasize that for us, the big theme is faith engaging culture. A couple of years ago, though, I noticed some problems. I noticed it in this class as I was teaching it, but also in other courses I was teaching with undergrads. I have too many slides, so I'm going to skip some. Here we go. So the problems. I noticed that even though they're very bright, most Villanova students have minimal biblical literacy, and this just creates problems for other courses in theology and religious studies, but also just in general in the humanities. If you don't recognize basic stories from the Bible or have a sense of how the whole thing hangs together, you have trouble understanding Western culture and truthfully global culture. And so I wanted to figure out how to address that issue. Second, even though they know we're in trouble and they really care, a lot of Villanova students lack ecological literacy. That is, they may know that there are a lot of problems, but they don't quite get how they hang together, and they may struggle to understand how everything is connected, as the papal encyclical Laudato Si says. And finally, even though many Villanova students may come from religious families, though certainly not all, a great many undergrads dread taking courses in theology and religious studies. And we are very aware of this. We work pretty hard to overcome their dread, but I wanted to figure out a way to address this dread as well, and maybe turn a theology class into something so engaging that they wouldn't just stop dreading it, they would actually look forward to coming to class. So for me, I developed then additional goals, and that is just a reflection of these problems, that students would become more biblically and ecologically literate, that they would become more enthusiastic about this discipline, maybe even want to declare a minor or a major, and that they would become more passionate about the mutually enriching dialogue between faith and religion on one hand and sustainability on the other. So I developed a course built around the generative theme of water, and that term generative theme is from Paulo Freire. Why? Why water? Well, lots of reasons. I'll hit on a couple here. I think sometimes water is invisible to us if we live privileged lives where we just turn on a tap and it comes out, where pitchers of water are available everywhere. Most of us in the US use about 80 gallons of water per day. So imagine you had to go and get 80 of these per day. Now, in the developing world, people don't use 80 gallons per day because they have to go and get it themselves. But that makes water visible to them. It's often invisible to us. And so a class that makes something ubiquitous and invisible suddenly visible often has transformative effects. Also, water is essential for life, and theology and religious studies are both interested in life and living. Waterways connect us to one another, which is often a key theme in religious classes or in religion classes. And it is significant in every major world religion, something we discover in class, part of the beliefs and practices of every major world religion. It's pervasive in Jewish and Christian scriptures, and I'll say teaching this class has changed how I read Jewish and Christian scripture. Looking for water has actually given me new theological and literary insights I didn't have before. And it's the central material element used in baptism. So, the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches, the baptismal or the sacramental traditions, they have sacraments. We disagree on how many sacraments there are, but we agree. We agree on Eucharist or communion and on baptism. Baptism is shared across so many Christian traditions, and water is the central material element in play. And then, of course, water is deeply implicated in many social justice issues, including freshwater access and scarcity, and also questions around the environment, flooding, as we're seeing in Hurricane Helene, and so many other issues. Women's education, girls' education, water intersects with so many other issues. So I built this course around water, and I'm not going to go into great detail about all the assignments and readings, but here's the basic structure. The first unit is on the water around us, just making water more visible. So we read a little bit about water in world religions. We take a watershed tour on Villanova's campus with Dr. Steve Goldsmith of the Department of Geography and the Environment, and just begin to get a sense of how water is a part of our lives even when we don't notice it. Then we move into a longer unit on the history of water in Christian and Jewish traditions. And we read major hits of the Jewish and Christian scriptures looking for water. It turns out it's everywhere. And looking for both the historical, ecological elements of, why is someone digging a well? And why is some other group filling in the well afterward? Well, they're in conflict with each other. And if you don't know that water is scarce and how wells work, then you read this text with very little sense. But when you understand water dynamics in the ancient Near East, suddenly, the political issues come to the fore. And we're also looking for water's symbolism and the way water's symbolism changes over time. Finally, we move into a unit on water and justice for humans and earth. And we read stories about water injustice. We read important documents from Catholic and broader Christian tradition on water justice, and we read Native American and African American perspectives on the history of water injustice in the United States. At the end of all of this, there's a sort of a capstone where students work in groups to make a presentation. And the presentation is designed to draw all of this together. As a group, they must decide on one water-related issue that affects the world today. Then they need to research it, find out what makes it complicated, why is it hard to address. And in their presentation, they tell us about this water issue and its complexity. Then they have to draw on religious or theological or ethical perspectives to help us understand it better, to help us understand what's at stake, why it's a problem ethically or theologically, and also what vision of a better world might be given to us by some larger theological or ethical perspective. Finally, then, they have to tell us what is one organization doing today to address this water issue. They don't have to reinvent the wheel themselves, but then they have to tell us 2 things we could do. And one of those things could be purchase something differently, but only one of the suggestions can be purchase something differently, because I think we're very tempted in American culture to always have consumer responses to the world's problems. And so they have to say something else about, here's an organization you could join, here's a legal process you could support, something that goes beyond just buying things differently. So that is the water course, and I have heard great things from students about its impact on them. And I'll end by saying, for me, one of the most exciting pieces of this is that students actually said they understand theology as a totally different thing than they thought it was, and that they want to take more courses in the discipline, even as they care more about the world around them. Thank you.
So I'm next. I was wondering who was next.
You'll have to jump ahead.
Yeah, okay. So my name is Joseph Lennon. I'm the director of the Center for Irish Studies, and I've been teaching a class for 14 years, on not every semester, but on medieval Irish literature, medieval to early modern Irish literature. I've also become very involved in sustainability efforts, and I could no longer teach this class in the old way of really a textual focus, asking people to understand origins of Irish culture. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how I reimagined this class and this semester, what I'm doing differently. So I used to ask, and I still do, us to go back and look at some of these old texts, which are in manuscript form and are from an oral tradition that were first captured and written down starting in the 8th, 9th century. And we look at these old tales, many of which are still told, passed on orally. But I've also decided to bring in some of the natural elements of this. So in Ireland, you may or may not know that fairy bushes or fairy trees are protected. These are trees in which the good people, people of earlier times who became fairies, as we would say, lived beneath these trees or near these trees. They are intimately connected with story and with place, and the indigenous knowledge that's connected to these trees goes back thousands and thousands of years within the places and the local places. So when a new highway is going to be built, storytellers and local people protest, and they have literally moved the expressway from Dublin to Galway. The engineers were not happy about this, to move it 5 miles around, so they avoided cutting down a fairy tree. It's a different perspective than we have in the United States about productivity, about efficiency. And so what I do is try to help students see this and bring it into their lives. So a popularization of medieval, this is at the end of our semester, of medieval Irish culture is a film called Wolf Walkers, and it's about the extermination of wolves in Ireland. And this is turned into a political issue, and we see shades of Oliver Cromwell, but we get into more of the actual history when we look at Wolf Walkers. So what I've done is add really a whole new objective to the class, integrate questions of sustainability into readings of Irish literature and culture. It's fairly broad, but it allows me, for instance, this morning to recap Michael Mann's presentation and talk about tipping points and the importance of being aware and having sustainability in cultural studies. As we understand the climate crisis today, I think almost everyone, maybe not everyone, but almost everyone in the room would agree with me that we have a serious problem in culture. That it's not that people don't necessarily know there's climate change, it's they don't know what to do about it and they feel unable to act. Climate anxiety is something that hobbles people in a sense, or keeps people from moving forward. So what I've taken into class ideas from Villanova's commitment to sustainability, and I asked the students, one of our supplementary readings is Laudato Si, and to actually look at these as we are reading old tales and how they integrate. So in the Sustainable Development Goals, I focus on quality education, climate action, life below water, life on land, and responsible consumption and production. And I ask students to do this. I asked them to learn about the SDGs. I was really, really surprised how little they knew about sustainability. And so when I come into class, I do things like I bring the mast, the acorns. There's a tree outside Tollentine that's having a mast year. All of the acorns are falling. Or I bring them out to see the pawpaw tree, which grows out there, and I take the fruit and actually eat it for my breakfast. I hope nobody knows where that is so that you don't do the same, because it's really good, at any rate. So our SDGs. So you may say, well, what does Irish literature have to do with any of this? That's just about fairies and about, don't say drinking, because that's the one thing that I hate hearing about. But here's a poem called Kilcash. What shall we do for timber? The last of the woods is down. Kilcash and the house of its glory, and the bell of the house are gone. The spot where that lady waited, who shamed all the woman for grace when earls came sailing to greet her, and mass was said in the place. My grief and affliction. So at the bottom, no sound of duck or geese there, hawk's cry or eagle's call. I talk about deforestation, which is a great tragedy in Ireland. People have a vision of Ireland as a beautiful grassy plain with sheep. It used to be a forested place. What they say in Cork is a squirrel used to be able to walk from Cork to Donegal without touching the ground. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it's a wonderful case study for understanding. And there are enormous efforts in Ireland today towards reforestation. I won't read all of the poem, but this is considered one of Ireland's first poems. And I use it to show how integrated humans are with the natural world in this vision. I won't ask us to read the Old Irish, but I'm a gust on the sea, and this is when the poet Amergin first steps foot in Ireland. He's come from Spain, from Hibernia to, you may know the connections between Spain and Ireland, but there are connections there. I am a gust on the sea, I am a footfall of a wave, I am a roar of the sea, I am a stag of 7 tines, I am a hawk on a cliff, I am a tear of sunlight, I am a cry of love. And it goes on, and it shows how the author and the voice of the author, most importantly, the voice of the poet, has an integrated vision of nature in which they are a part of nature, not they are in the dominion over nature. So we also read secondary readings that focus on eco-criticism. We talk about the Usla and the Farraga, the noble people of the sea. Some of you have heard of mermaids before. And all of the stories, the lycanthropy, the stories of werewolves, the men becoming wolves and then back into men. All of these stories that originally come out of Irish context. Not all, but, right? We also talk about the Lenni Lenape, who know or knew the stories of the land that we currently are living on, and now tell stories in Oklahoma. And the shame on us, in a sense, that we do not know the names of the places of all these hills. We do not know where the great oak stands were. We do not know that Montgomery Avenue is the watershed, and that on either side of it, we have different, it runs to the Delaware, it runs to the Schuylkill. It had been a hunting trail for the Lenni Lenape. People are unaware of the people who had lived here for thousands of years. So in Irish literature, place and the history of place is absolutely paramount. Every place has a story, and every place has a history. And that emphasis on place can help students move away from a consumer mentality that focuses on the King of Prussia Mall and where a new Starbucks is set to go up. Sorry, I'm delayed. So we move in Irish, so I'm moving away from, this is the county map of Ireland, to a medieval map where there are 5 provinces, to geological maps. and to watershed maps. So to help students understand different visions of Ireland that have a natural setting. I'm not sure how much time I have left. I have about 10 seconds. All right, perfectly timed. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much for being here today. My presentation is going to focus on study abroad program that we have created in the Latin American Studies program 3 years ago. We had a program in Chile for more than 25 years. And after all these years, the professor who was working on that program retired, so we decided to rethink our goals, rethink our pedagogies, and rethink also some of the main topics that concern us here at Villanova University. So 2 of the main important aspects that we wanted to include in this presentation and in this study abroad program is the ethnic component that we don't have at Villanova University. We don't have an ethnic program or an ethnic studies department, which I think it's crucial for critical thinking for universities to have. And the connection that we have been working on and presenting here today with sustainability efforts. So what you're going to hear today is how in the Latin American Studies program we have been integrating indigenous environmental knowledge through place-based education in Yucatan, Mexico. So the important goals that I want to highlight here with this program, the name of the program is Spanish Language and Indigenous Sustainability in Yucatan. The course that we teach there, that it's a required course, it's a course in English called Ethnoecology and Indigenous Sustainability, with the idea and with the hopes that we have students from different departments that can take this class in addition to language courses and courses on culture in Mexican literature, to learn more about Yucatec Maya environmental epistemologies. So the first thing was to put those epistemologies in the center of the discussion on sustainability. Yucatec Maya knowledge has been there for 1,000 years. It's relevant, it's necessary, and it's urgent for local communities to face different environmental conflicts that are facing today in the Yucatan Peninsula. Number 2, advancing research and teaching practices in a non-traditional classroom. The idea is that we take students during the weekends to work with Yucatec Maya communities, to learn from them, to do research with them, and to collaborate in different projects that they are working right now. And then the other aspect, which I think is crucial, is this experiential learning component that we wanted to highlight with our students, that they feel that they were not only learning from articles, readings, documentaries, and in-classroom discussions, but also learning from meeting with these local communities in Yucatan. So some of the indigenous epistemologies that are the center of the academic discussions in sustainability, we decided to adopt an ethnoecological approach to teach this class. We were kind of considering what are the lessons that ethnoecology can bring to sustainability. And the Mexican biologist, Victor Manuel Toledo, give us like a very good way to framework all the discussions that we want to have with our students. Toledo combines this indigenous knowledge with also practical knowledge of indigenous communities in Yucatan to explore different topics connected to natural and cultural knowledge from indigenous communities in Mexico. So one of the most important ideas and contributions from ethnoecology to sustainability is that in order to be effectively working on efforts on conservation and preservation, we need to take care and we need to be and stand in solidarity with indigenous communities around the world. So that's one of the most important contributions from Toledo's framework on ethnoecology. So advancing research and teaching practices, we have decided to do this through a place-based education approach. As Joseph Lennon was mentioning, it's super important to understand the history, where the students are living, where the students are studying, which is the city of Mérida, Yucatan, which is the capital city, but in the context of the state of Yucatan, one of the most important regions where Yucatec Maya communities have established, as well as in other parts in Mexico where Maya communities live, like in the state of Tabasco, Chiapas, Campeche, Quintana Roo, and of course in countries in Central America. The place-based education allows students to immerse in local communities and heritage for the study of culture, language, and the environment. I think this is like a crucial framework to understand sustainability, that sustainability not only deals with issues on the environment, but also deals with issues of culture, language, cultural heritage, and identity. And also the projects and activities that students from the Latin American Studies course, they do include these collaborations and workshops with Yucatec Maya healers, with activists working with stingless bees in the Yucatan Peninsula, and the collaboration and working with communities that are introducing community-based tourism initiatives in Yucatan. So the idea is that students also learn from these communities an alternative model of development. A model of development that emerges from the needs, from the cosmovisions, from the culture, and from the indigenous epistemologies like the Yucatec Maya in Yucatan. Here are some examples of our students. In photograph number 1, we have our students working with Ana Piña. Ana Piña is a Maya woman, an expert on stingless bees. And the beauty of the stingless bees in Yucatan is that you can be around her and it will never harm you. It's a bee that is very beautiful in a way that has been part of the Maya culture for thousands of years. The Codex Madrid, in the last 10 pages, has a record, has like depictions, has like graphics of the Xunancap god of the stingless bees in Yucatan. The other one is an example of our students who attended the second year study abroad program in a workshop with Zuli Patron and her daughter Erika Patron on creating some kind of balm with medicinal plants. They work on them, they explain them how to do them, and they end up producing a balm that they can take home after giving a tour in their botanical garden of medicinal plants. We also provide opportunities for culinary lessons by local Maya women who have like cooperatives working on community-based tourism. Students also learning how to sew in Tequit, and students participating in the workshops that I have already mentioned with medicinal plants. So what are like the important aspects and the legacies of colonialism and the current struggles that communities face in Yucatan? That's one of the key components to understand that the legacies of colonialism are still persistent, that racism is still a major problem in the case of Yucatec Maya communities in a country like Mexico, and that the way that these intercultural dialogues that have been established with Yucatec Maya communities allow students to understand the history of the Mayas from the past, from the classical period, and the present struggles that they're facing within their communities. Struggles, for example, with deforestation, struggles, for example, with mega projects like the Tren Maya, struggles, for example, connected to the pushing of the Mexican government to provide less and less opportunities to the Yucatec Maya communities to preserve their natural and their cultural knowledge. So final thoughts, and this is something that after 3 years of working together with wonderful group of students, these are like my very brief reflections. Number one, it's important to develop innovative and culturally responsive curriculum in a university like Villanova that prizes for doing critical thinking. Number two, developing new pedagogies of sustainability by working together with indigenous communities, by working closely, in this specific case, with Yucatec Maya people. And at the very last, and this is something that I think it's crucial to understand because we care so much about building and creating safe spaces for students, we also need to push for discomfort for students. We also need to push for situations where students feel in unfamiliar settings, feel that they don't belong, feel that their presence is completely different to the kind of presence that they could feel in Villanova. These are like the moments when they start questioning their own identity. These are like the moments when they are putting themselves in a position that doesn't put them always at the top from the pyramid. So a good way to think about these opportunities is through seeking discomfort, to pushing students and to convincing them to take risks, opportunities, and also to take these study abroad programs as experiences that they have never taken before. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tom Umile. I teach in the chemistry and biochemistry department. I'm excited that last year the chemistry and biochemistry department signed on to the Green Chemistry Commitment. This is a worldwide consortium of about 200 universities that are committed to teaching our students about green chemistry and sustainability, for our chemists to be thinking about things like risk and hazard and toxicology, the environmental impacts of the chemicals that we make and use. Over the last year and going forward, we're doing things like my colleagues have been talking about here. We are revising courses to include a lot more sustainability and green science. We are inviting speakers in our seminar series that talk about these themes. We're revising curricula. I offer a graduate course in green chemistry and sustainable chemistry that's become quite popular. So we're making all those big changes. Today I want to kind of take a step aside and talk about a different challenge. I wear many hats. I'm the director of our general chemistry program. We have hundreds of students that take general chemistry here. And a challenge, I think, with an introductory course, and maybe some of you have faced this or your colleagues have faced this, is that sometimes the introductory courses have a laundry list of criteria and learning objectives that you've got to get through. An introductory chemistry course is designed to teach the fundamentals that these students are going to need for their future chemistry work, or maybe, we're a service department. I have lots of students in my general chemistry course that are, biologists or engineers. And so I've got to also lay the foundational chemistry that they're going to need in their courses. So I got to cover what atoms are and what molecules are and how chemical reactions work and how we think about chemical reactions and how the structure of a chemical affects its chemical and physical properties and how energy is involved in reactions. Like there's a lot of things there. And I think a lot of good-natured folks would at that moment go, there's only 14 weeks in the semester. And if I've got a list this long, if you want me to start teaching some green or sustainable science, like, if I'm going to spend a day or two on that, that's a day or two that I'm not covering one of those other things that you or our allied departments want us to teach. And so that's a real challenge. And what I want to share with you today is just one example of how I've approached that challenge in my course. When I'm teaching a general chemistry course, I don't have the time, don't have the freedom to necessarily focus specifically on green chemistry or sustainability, which is something I would love to do. But the way I've approached it is to instead use green and sustainable science as the lens that I use to introduce or explore these fundamental topics that we're going to study. Historically, I would, back in the day, I would introduce, we're doing chapter 4, we're going to talk about, chemical reactions, and I'd give an example of why we should care about that. When we talk about isomers in chemistry, I would give students a little introduction on, different drug molecules can have different isomeric forms, and some might be therapeutic, and some might be poisonous, and this is why we should care about isomers, and then delve into the isomer chapter. And so what I've done, one example of this, is I've changed what those introductions are to be sustainability themed. So instead of talking about that kind of medicinal aspect that I just gave an example of, I would use a real world example of sustainable chemistry in action. And what I've drawn upon for these vignettes, these introductions, are the EPA's Green Chemistry Challenge Awards. I think these are a very useful tool, at least for a chemist and for me. Each year, annually, the EPA awards a number of Green Chemistry Challenge Awards in a bunch of focus areas. And there's a bunch of criteria for this, and I have them listed here, but 3 of them I think were important for me. One, these awards have to include, the award of technology, rather, has to include a lot of actual chemistry. It's not chemistry adjacent, it's actual chemistry. So I've got a lot of things to work with here. Secondly, these aren't theoretical developments or theoretical technologies. These aren't just ideas. These are technologies that have had a measured impact that someone is using to reduce waste or make something quantifiably safer. So it's not just a pie-in-the-sky dream, but it's something that's real. And third, and maybe most importantly for our students, these are awarded mostly to companies, to corporations. And I've got some logos up here from companies that have received one of these EPA Green Chemistry Challenge Awards. These are household names that our students have seen before. Maybe these are products that they use. And so this is like my hook to get them interested, because many of the products I talk about, they've either seen or used before, or at least they're familiar with that logo. So it hooks them in. So just give me an example for these. I create one slide, basically mini case studies. I don't have time to give a full hour-long case study on one of these technologies, but I made a kind of a one slide that I spend 3 or 4 or maybe 5 minutes at the start of a week or start of a class, and use that to set the scene for why we're going to learn about what we're going to learn about. So just for example, here's my one slide intro that I use on the day when we start talking about types of chemical reactions, specifically oxidation and reduction reactions. And I won't get in the weeds too much, but to kind of show you and give you an idea of what we do, I talk about here on the left, I have the reaction between nitrogen and hydrogen. This is the reduction of nitrogen to make ammonia. This is the so-called Haber-Bosch reaction that I explained to the students. This is used industrially to make most of the world's ammonia that we use for fertilizers. So this reaction is so ubiquitous that it's been estimated that half of the nitrogen in our bodies comes from that reaction because we've eaten food that was grown using Haber-Bosch ammonia. And I use this as a moment to say, oh, by the way, this reaction has some good sides, because like nitrogen is so plentiful in the Earth's atmosphere. Like, this is great. We're using a very abundant resource. But the downside is this reaction is energy intensive, and that hydrogen, it doesn't look like it, but that hydrogen actually comes from fossil sources. We make most of our hydrogen by stripping it out of things like methane. So there's a carbon footprint to this reaction. I mentioned to the students that that ammonia gets turned into ammonium. We use that as an ion to make our fertilizers, and it gets put on fields, and that's what the plants grow on. But there's a downside there as well, because there are things in the environment like bacteria and just the environment that will oxidize those ammonium ions and turn them into things like nitrates and nitrites and nitrogen oxides, and all of those things get washed away or evaporate, and so the farmer has to now put more fertilizer down. So there's a financial cost to that as well. And so in 2016, this company, Corteva AgriScience, they developed an additive that you could add to your fertilizer, this instinct molecule I put down the bottom. And what it does is it deactivates basically all those microbes that cause that ammonium oxidation. And when that happens, the farmer could put fertilizer on their field. The fertilizer can do its job, and so we put less fertilizer down. We don't have to worry about it washing away the same way that we used to. And so with this vignette of here's a place where people use redox chemistry, maybe I hook and interest students that way, but I also point out some of the green benefits. See, I'm short on time. I want to just show you briefly another example. Here's an example I use when we start talking about kind of mass balance in chemical reactions. When we teach students about reactions, we have to know all the atoms that you put into the reaction have to come out. They have to go somewhere into products or byproducts, and we have to, you might remember from back in the day, bad memories of balancing chemical reactions. Well, chemists have to think about that when they're trying to be more sustainable, and BASF developed, this is a classic example of redesigned synthesis of ibuprofen. And I have the original synthesis on top and the new synthesis on the bottom. And, for my first year students, this is probably, more chemistry than they understand. So I color code it for them. And I point out that all the atoms that I have colored in green are atoms that get used and end up in the product that gets bottled and sold. And all the atoms that are colored brown are atoms that are used in those reactants, but then they end up getting thrown away at the end. And I point out that by watching where your atoms go, you can see in that first reaction, the first sequence of reactions, there's a lot of brown atoms that don't actually end up in the product that the company's going to sell. So they're buying atoms, using them, and then throwing them away. That's kind of waste. So I use this as an example again to, we're going to talk about mass balance, but it's helpful here to point out why we might care about that from a sustainable standpoint. I'll just end with one thing. This is just one example of things I do. Notice I'm not changing. It's not find and replace. It's just the lens with which I introduce topics. I have not even added as a official learning objective sustainability to the Gen Chem course. However, despite that, at the end of semester on my CATs, my course evaluations, or on the end of semester reflection I have students write, you would be shocked how many students mention these 5-minute intros that I use once a week as one of the things that they really enjoyed about the course. So I guess my take-home message is it'd be great if you could renovate a whole course or curriculum, but you don't have to. You could just make little tiny changes and they'll have a big impact. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Victoria. And first, I'd like to thank my fellow panelists. Very interesting talks. Thank you all. So my name is Aaron Wemhoff. I'm a faculty in mechanical engineering, and I'll tell you a little bit about introducing sustainability into engineering courses, so a little bit of a different point of view here. And in my particular case, it's a graduate level HVAC, or heating, ventilation, air conditioning course that the department asked me to teach a few years ago. So the title of this course is Analysis and HVAC Analysis and Design. I was asked to teach this course back in around 2020 or so, and the message I want to get across is that this particular course I got to develop from scratch. So unlike, for example, the general chemistry course, this is a course that I got to develop from the get-go, and I was able to introduce sustainability into it. So you can see we've had it offered twice. The first offering was in 2021 summer, which was an all-online course offering. And then the second offering was in spring 2024, so it just happened. So it's a graduate course, but we have had some undergraduates in it, and it's designed to allow senior level undergrads to attend as well. All right, so basically what happened is that in the winter of 2021, so right around January 2021, the College of Engineering got a grant from the Lemelson Foundation to implement what's called their Engineering One Planet framework. What this is that this is a foundation who wants to try to get sustainable engineering concepts into the engineering curriculum. And the way that's done is to help train the teachers. And that was the case here. Back in January of 2021, I was a part of the first cohort of 2 cohorts of these workshops. I think the other one was offered either 6 months later or a year later. I was one of 8 cohorts, or 8 faculty in that cohort, and then there's a second cohort of 8 faculty. And this was a week-long workshop. Of course, this being in the winter of 2021, this was all done online, because back then that's all we did. And so what we would do is meet every day for a week, and we would spend probably about 3 or 4 hours learning about a new concept within sustainable engineering, and then we would break and take the rest of the day to figure out how to integrate that into the syllabus for a given engineering course. And the goal of all this, of course, is that if you get enough instructors participating in this and get sustainability concepts integrated into enough courses, then the students would have seen this in multiple courses, and then it would be ingrained in their mindset as they go off into their careers. All right, so this particular workshop was run by Bill Lorentz and Andrea Welker, and I did get a little bit of honorarium for participating as part of the foundation grant. All right, so I'm not going to get into all the details of the workshop, but essentially it is what I said. We meet, we learn about some of the elements of sustainability, and then we integrate it into our syllabus, and then to get said honorarium, we have to submit our plans for our course, including an updated syllabus within a certain deadline. And then later on, we would have reunions. We have this a meeting reunion where we talk about what happened with the integration in our courses, some lessons learned, and so forth. All right, so this is the Engineering One Planet framework. And this particular diagram here, you could spend an entire week on, and that's exactly what we did. So I'm not going to get into the details. But I want you to see that there's essentially 9 elements to it. So you see the 8 elements on the outside of it, and then you have in the middle of it, you have systems thinking. So of the 9 elements, we learned that over the course of a week. And some take a little more time than others to talk about, but all of these are related to engineering specifically, and some related to aspects outside of engineering. And I'll show an example of that here in just one moment. So how did I integrate it into my particular course? Well, again, I had the luxury of starting my brand new course, and I was able to make it one of my pillars of what I'll call holistic, sustainable, and broad thinking about HVAC design. So the others being fundamental concepts, design, concepts, tools, and applications. And so when it comes to sustainability, I was able to decide, again, after pondering what I've learned, where would it fit best? Would it fit best in lectures, or would it fit best in perhaps homework assignments or other types of materials? And here I put most of them into homework assignments, some were into lectures. So here's an example, systems thinking, just the very first introductory lecture. This is a snapshot of the slide I used, and it talks about systems thinking. Now, Dr. McDermott-Levy did a fantastic job listing all of the UN Sustainable Development Goals to show an example of systems thinking, and that is there's an interconnectedness of all the systems in the world. So the health system is related to energy system and the water system and so forth. That's what we have here. So when you talk about HVAC itself, it's important for things like medical research. You mentioned how medicines have to be kept at certain temperature ranges for them to be effective. But at the same time, there's a relationship between HVAC and, say, the carbon system, because HVAC consumes energy, which then can be related to carbon release into the atmosphere. So it's important to look at the pluses and minuses and all this interconnectedness of using HVAC systems in society. So what ended up happening then is some of these were into lectures, but again, most of them were into homework assignments. And what I did is, because I had to cover 4 other areas besides sustainability, when I had these weekly homework assignments, one of the homework questions would be related to sustainability and some of these topics that were talked about in the framework. And what we would do is start the subsequent lecture for about 15 or 20 minutes and talk about so the answers or some of the responses to these questions that they had on their homework. And I'm not going to get into the details of what we talked about as part of these in-class discussions, but I did highlight one thing, and that is the stuff in red. And there is a lot of connections between HVAC and sustainability, and probably the most prominent one, or the lowest hanging fruit, is in the 4th generation refrigerants. There have been studies that have shown that one of the predominant carbon release or global warming potential improvements would be to replace the current refrigerants that we use with low GWP or low global warming refrigerants. And so there's a lot of work being done in that area. And you can see some of the stuff here is related to that. So I'm not going to get into the details of some of the homework assignments we had, and we had these discussions, but I will tell you what I observed, in that overall the students responded very positively to these homework assignments and these in-class discussions. I will say that, surprise, surprise, engineers prefer to be a little more timid. We tend to like to write things instead of talk about them as a group in terms of discussion. Strangely enough, and this is probably different than what a lot of other courses experience. I don't know if it was my cohort or if this is a general thing, but when I had the online-only offering, I had students doing a lot more talking than I did when we were all physically in class together, which is probably different than what a lot of you observed. But it worked out pretty well. So the way these homework assignments were is the students would write a small essay, and then they would be prepared to come in and talk about it in class. Of course, now in the world of generative AI, I only really had 1 student out of the 13 total that basically did a blank copy and paste from a ChatGPT output. So of course disappointing to see, but I didn't say it was against the rules. But everyone else, at the very least, they used generative AI, they reformulated it into their own thoughts and words, and they were happy to discuss it. So I was happy to see that. And that is all I have for you all. So you can see now, again, you've seen some courses where it was integrated into existing courses, and I can show you now how you can also integrate it into planning a new course. So thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our presenters. This is now an based on those short vignettes you've heard from each of our faculty here at Villanova. And if you don't have any questions, feel free to use the form and give us some feedback, maybe if you're thinking about it. So is there any questions? Raise your hand and I'll come to you. All right. Coming on down. Like them on The Price is Right.
Okay, I'll be the guinea pig. So in trying to do these things myself, I also was in the cohort that Aaron mentioned. One of the things that immediately strikes me is the interdisciplinarity, of course, of the whole topic of climate change and sustainability. And I think one of the things that frightens faculty members in trying to undergo a transition in their course is it forces us to teach things that are outside of our comfort zone, outside of what we feel comfortable teaching. We're all deep experts at what we're expert at, right? As soon as we start talking about things that we're not expert in, we become quite shy about it, right? So I just wondered if any of you have any thoughts about how you overcome your anxiety about talking about things that you're not expert in. How do you deal with that?
I'm going to start with that because I don't have that anxiety. I don't share that anxiety. But from my perspective, there are plenty of things I don't know about that I need to know about. But when I held up the mast earlier, the acorns earlier, acorns populate medieval texts all the time because of the pigs that eat them. And it was a detail I always passed over. It was something I never really considered and thought about until I read a sustainability essay about it was about Irish culture and the importance of mast, and then started thinking about what are the implications. So I think along the lines of what Tom was saying, there's stuff in the material that it just requires us to highlight and bring out. But my hesitancy was, how am I going to do that? And I think that's what you're talking about with that anxiety. But I don't know if somebody else wants to.
I think that anxiety is real, and I think that anxiety, at least for me, that you're insinuating, I think it comes from a place of feeling like overnight I need to become an expert in sustainability. And I think I felt that when I first started doing. I have a long history with sustainability. My undergraduate advisor was ahead of his time, and so I thought about this stuff a long time ago, but I never felt confident teaching it. But in my professional career, I think where I started, or at least where I overcame that anxiety, was to say, all right, I don't need to be an expert in all things sustainable chemistry today. By training, I'm an organic chemist, so I found the examples that were in my own subdiscipline that were of interest to me, that I understood really well, that I could pick up really quickly. And over time, over years, going to conferences, reading more, I've started to become more comfortable talking about these other related areas, at least in chemistry, that I'm not formally trained in, right? That's not what I did in graduate school, but you just kind of pick it up over time. So I think the way for me to get over that anxiety is to just tell yourself it's okay, you don't need to be an expert in this today, just learn enough to spark your students' interest. And I'll just add one more thing. Sometimes we could let the students teach us. One of the things I actually do in my graduate course in sustainable chemistry, I'm not an expert in the 150 or 200 EPA Challenge Awards that are out there. I have the students actually do a bigger research project on one of them. I tell them, pick something that you're interested in. I have grad students that are in all different subdisciplines, so find the one that's interesting to you. And then they give like a half-hour presentation on it. And so every summer when I teach the class, I learn about 10 more examples that I didn't know existed before. So sometimes if we don't know something, we could kind of turn it into an exploratory project with our students and learn alongside them.
Yeah, it's such a great question. Thank you. I want to echo both the idea that you can learn from your students, and I also ask students to make short presentations throughout the whole class where they have to talk about water in either art or the news, some water-related issue that comes up in art or the news. So I'm constantly also learning new examples, and I've stopped trying to come up with the examples myself. They just provide them in class. But I will say one of the great gifts of pivoting this course to using this lens of water, or as a theologian, a hermeneutic of water, is that because I am not an expert and don't know all of this, I've had to depend on my colleagues a lot more, and not just colleagues in my own department, but outside of it. So, Steve Goldsmith has become my friend because he takes my students on this water tour. And then in a totally separate project, a grant project that has an environmental angle, Steve is helping us out there. So I have discovered that there is great collegiality here that helps me supplement my own ignorance, but also oftentimes our fellow colleagues are willing to come in and help us out when we're not the expert on something. So Steve isn't the only person who comes into this class to teach, and I have on many occasions texted or called a colleague and said, explain this thing to me, I don't get it. and so that's been a great gift to me in my own research.
Okay. So yeah, I think Tom hit the nail on the head about having the students learn. So I have the luxury of teaching a graduate class, but this I think would also apply to a senior undergraduate level class, and that is instead of having the instructor educate the students, it's more of an attitude of, hey, let's all learn together, and let's all explore these new topics together because they are very relevant and important.
In my case, it's very easy because when I teach the class on ethnoecology, there are like several units where we have a guest speaker. A guest speaker could be a scholar from Yucatan University coming to our class, preparing students for the field work that they're going to be doing with the Yucatec Maya communities. And what is even more important, when they have questions and I cannot answer those questions, I always tell, go to your local experts. The Yucatec Maya communities are experts. They produce knowledge. They are the ones who have this situated knowledge, and those are the ones that are going to give you the most accurate responses to the kind of questions that you have. Be active listeners. Be patient. Follow them. Walk with them. Accompany them. And then after all those opportunities that you have to spend time with them, you will maybe find the answer to your questions or maybe more problems to the questions that you have already faced.
It's a great question. Other questions?
Yes, any other questions? I just want to thank you for a really thought-provoking panel. I mean, all your input was really valuable, so thank you.
So, most of you said that students have received this positively, but have you received any pushback from students, and how did you handle that in any case?
This works. All right. Surprisingly, no. I think that's a great question. That's something that I guess I'll say it this way, or answer it this way. I've been trying to teach a little bit of green or sustainable science in my chemistry classes since before the pandemic, which seems like a long time ago. I used to have to do a big wind-up to explain why we should care about the environment. I feel like early in my career when I was teaching students about sustainability or teaching chemists about sustainability, I had to sell them on it first. My first day of the semester, I would dedicate to explaining why we should care. I'd show them disasters from the 50s and 60s and 70s and how chemistry did bad things and that we need to get beyond that. I'm finding I actually don't have to do that anymore. It's almost, I don't want to call it a waste of time, but I'm preaching to the choir. It's one of the strengths, I think, of our current generation of students is that they are extremely connected with social justice and the need to take care and steward our environment. So, happily, I can report that I haven't had any pushback from students at all.
I just want to echo what Tom is saying. I've not gotten pushback from students. Sometimes students are like, huh. But it's typically more from faculty who are like, you're going to do what? Medieval Irish literature and sustainable, it's more that double take. And they're like, how are you going to get the Toynbee colon in there? How are you going to get, and so then it's more of a question. I mean, it does take it does take time to be creative and figure out what applies, what doesn't apply, what do I maybe not need to teach.
I would say from my point of view, the largest pushback comes from general misinformation. A few years ago, we had a small project where we provided some displays in the dining halls, and we were able to get surveys about the relationship between food and carbon footprint and water footprint. And these anonymous surveys were given out, and honestly, the only students who had a problem with it were the ones who had complete misunderstandings about the relationship between food and carbon footprint, saying things like the developing world is the primary cause for global warming and yada, yada, yada. So I think maybe perhaps we're getting students coming in that are more knowledgeable about the basics, but then again, you say maybe not. So I think as long as we kind of get the basics into them, I think we will see a lot less pushback.
Okay, we have another question.
So I had a question specific for the summer Yucatan program. Have you seen opportunities or found ways to integrate the Villanova team with local students or students around the areas where you're visiting and working?
We started 3 years ago, so we're still in the process of developing the identity of the program. I think we have reached the point where the program is well known at the university. We would love to give that step. I think those conversations are still pending. Hopefully with the engineering school for developing infrastructure with a sustainable focus and an ethnoecological focus, I think could be like a great collaboration on ethnoecology and sustainability from the perspective of indigenous communities. Another aspect that I think it's crucial for us is to link the conversations with the School of Nursing. The School of Nursing approved last year with the Global Health minor for students to go to Merida and learn from indigenous communities about medicinal plants and healing practices. We also have a core diversity requirement in our course that allows students to benefit from taking this class. Peace and Justice, we have a strong focus on environmental justice component. Students from cultural studies, GIS, global interdisciplinary studies have been taking this trip to Mexico. And I think the step that we would like to move forward with this program is yes, to have like more specific collaborations, direct collaborations that may not happen during the summer, but may happen during the whole academic year, so that we can continue strengthening those relationships that we already have with Yucatec Maya communities. Thank you.
Could I just say one last thing? And I know people have to go because there's class and we have another presentation. There are workshops for faculty around sustainability. We have a wonderful community of people who are helping. We're helping each other figure out how to do this in all their different disciplines. So please look for it, and if you're at your own institutions, please look for it. Thank you.
Thank you for that last comment, Joseph, and please give a round of applause to our